All right, good day, everyone. This is Jason Straight with the Past Cloud Virtual Group. There we go, back to the first slide. All right, our presentation today is Azure Data Platform Introduction with Javier. We're going to be getting that started here in just a moment, but before I do that, I just have a few announcements that I want to go through. So first things is this virtual group is brought to you by Microsoft Azure. They sponsor the virtual group, help us with making sure that we can do these from week to week and have the 2 sessions that we have every week by providing the resources, and then also hoping to help folks understand what they can do with Microsoft Azure when it comes to building data platforms in the cloud. If you are not yet a member, you can subscribe to the virtual group at cloud.pass.org. That'll get you a list of all of the upcoming sessions, and then also the newsletter that goes out periodically to let people know about what's coming up. In regards to upcoming sessions, we still have a number of them scheduled. I try to do 2 per week, so we got quite a few coming up here into the future. As always, though, we are looking for additional presenters, so if you are interested in presenting, you can reach out to us at cloud@pass.org, and we can get you into the schedule. Or if you'd like, you can go and fill out the call for speakers that's on the cloud.pass.org website and get your information in that way. This fall is PASS Summit 2020, and that is the premier data platform event for Microsoft technologies. If you are planning to attend and have not yet registered, you can get a discount on your registration. The discount code is right there on the screen, the VGDISFKDQ. I can provide that in chat for anyone that wants it, but it'll get you a discount on the summit registration. This virtual group is part of a number of virtual groups that PASS helps to provide support within our data platform community. Some of these focus on different technologies, such as virtualization and PowerShell. Others focus on different groups, such as Global Chinese or Women in Technology. So there's a lot of opportunities to go out and learn more about building up data platforms. Throughout the session, I expect some of you will have some questions. If you do, there is a question panel in the GoToWebinar interface. You can just go in there, type in your question, and as we get to the end of the session, I'll present the questions to Javier. And with that, let me pass things over to Javier for the presentation today, Azure Data Platform Introduction.
All right. Thank you so much, Jason. Let me share my screen. I think it's
coming through with the Azure portal.
Yeah. So here we go. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about all the different options that we may have in the data platform area under the Azure cloud, right? Basically, the idea is to get to know each of them, right? At least, as a quick introduction of each of the components, to basically be able to know and maybe in the future decide if one of those is going to be suitable for your next development, right? So let's get started. My name is Javier Villegas. I am from Buenos Aires, Argentina. I work as a DBA manager for Mediterranean shipping for around 14 years. Basically, my specialization is based on SQL Server administration, performance tuning, and high availability. And well, lately also getting involved quite a lot with Azure. Right? I'm also Microsoft MVP in the data platform category since 2016. And in my free time, I like to do this kind of presentations and discussion to basically follow the PASS leitmotif, connect, learn, and share. Right? So this is one of the things that I like the most. You also will see my contact information, social network, emails, blog, right? So feel free to reach me if you have any question about this presentation or something else that you would like to talk about. Right? So let's start it. Here we go. All right, this is basically the first picture of some of the most important services that we are going to find in the Azure Data Platform um, uh, environment in Azure, right? So let's try first of all to group them, and then let's get into a detail for the most important one. One of the key things that we have on any development when we are in Azure is the data load or the data ingestion, right? We need to be able to collect data from any cloud or on-premise data source, right? In order to feed whatever we are doing in our project in Azure, right? And to do that, there is one service called Azure Data Factory, and we're going to discuss a little bit more in later. But basically, that's the one that will help us to get different sources and ingest the data, even with some sort of transformation, right, into another component in the data platform scenario, right? Then we have the two major flavors of databases, right? I would say relational and non-relational, or structure and semi-structure, right? In one side, SQL Server, we're gonna elaborate on that a little bit more later, and also Cosmos DB, right? The semi-structured offering that Microsoft has in Azure. Additionally, for the warehouse, there is Azure SQL Data Warehouse, which in these days is suffering not only a rebranding, but also a big change, right? So from now on, it's going to be Azure Synapse Analytics, right? So it's going to include some of the benefit that we have with Azure Data Warehouse, but with some additional functionality. Then to store or park this data, we have the Azure Blob Storage and the Azure Data Lake, right? As a next group, we have the analytics part, in where we're gonna have three main components like Azure Data Lake, HD Insight, and Azure Databricks. Then for the streaming category, we will see that Microsoft offers several services that will allow us to handle stream data, right? And for that, we have Azure IoT Hub, Azure Event Hub, and so on, right? To process that streaming data, we have Azure Stream Analytics, and again, Azure Databricks, right? This is the initial grouping, and we're gonna go through them in a minute, right? Then, the final part of our project, right? It could be an Azure Analysis Services, right? Which is basically the service that will allow us to deploy tabular models in Azure, and finally to present different reports and dashboards, Power BI. For the whole machine learning thing, Microsoft offerings are Azure ML and ML Server, as well as, again, Azure Data Factory, right? Then all the cognitive services, right? In where we can use them to enrich the data that we are collecting and processing in our project. Then the Azure Search and Azure Data Catalog, right? Basically to be able to have some governance on the data that we're handling. And finally, something that is not totally tied to data platform, but basically is a set of services that are cross Azure, basically for all the services, right? Those services are related to the infrastructure, right? We have the whole connectivity with the express route. We have the authentication based on Azure Active Directory, the whole security thing with all the services, for advanced threat protection, Azure Functions, and also Visual Studio, right? So those are the foundation of the services that we're going to be deploying later. So, talking a little bit more deeper about what we can do with these components. Basically, we have on the left side all the options that we may have as a source, as data source, right? As you can see, we can find at the top, we can find stream data, right? Again, these days, Microsoft is pushing quite hard with the data streams. We can have any source of data. We can have a relational database. We can have files. We can have Spark. In terms of data sources, there are a variety of them, and most probably, even if we need to go to an old data source. Couple of weeks back, I had to involve an IBM AS400 to do a data extraction, and through ODBC and Azure Data Factory, I was able to accomplish that. Speaking of which, Azure Data Factory is the following component in this subgroup, right? When you see in the slide, load and ingest, right? At the top, we have the Event Hub to process the streaming data. And in the bottom part, we have Azure Data Factory, again, to ingest data into our project, right? The following step is, for example, to store the data, right, in where we can use an Azure Data Lake. And also we can start involving the warehouse functionality of SQL Data Warehouse or Azure Synapse Analytics. The next component is how we process the data, right? Again, in the upper part, we have the whole stream analytics, right, in where we can process the data that we are receiving through the Event Hub and the stream data. From the bottom part, we have Azure Databricks, right, one of the services that we're going to be focusing some time during the presentation, right, to enrich the data that we are collecting, right. We have the cognitive services to do that. The following step of our project could be, start distributing and presenting this data to different set of users, to different set of reports, and also it could be the source of another Azure Data project. So going through the component, we mentioned briefly Azure Data Factory, which is basically the Azure offering to do cloud ETL, right? And to be able to scale this kind of activities, right? If you remember, I mean, if you're coming from the SQL Server world, and most probably you are familiar with the SQL Server integration services, well, Azure Data Factory is not the replacement of integration services in Azure, but it's a very good complement, right? It can do things that SSIS packages are not able to do, and also, complement some of the things that are lack on SSIS. So extremely interesting services if we would like to start playing with, right? Azure Data Factory is the entry door of every single project in Azure. The next component that we're going to be talking about is the Azure Data Lake, which is the generation 2, right? Which is basically a set of capabilities dedicated to big data analytics and to store, process and eventually feed data to another component, right? As we spoke, Azure Synapse Analytics is going to be today this service is in preview, right? But soon we're going to be able to do, warehouse and big data analytics at big scale. Azure Databricks, which is one of my favorite these days. Basically, this one is totally based on Apache Spark, right? Actually, the offering is Databricks, right? Which are created by the founders of Azure Spark, right? So Microsoft took Databricks and put it into Azure, right? To integrate it with the whole security stack, authentication stack with Azure Active Directory, and also, to be part of the offering that Microsoft has in Azure, right? So this service is quite powerful. We're gonna go through it in detail in a moment. Azure Cosmos DB is the Microsoft globally distributed multi-model database, right? Which basically allow us to have presence all around the world, right? Very quickly with low latency in a let's say multi-model database, meaning that we can treat the data as structured, semi-structured, unstructured, right? And the good part is that we have several possibilities to handle the data through different APIs, right? Azure Cognitive Services, as we said, is the set of algorithms to enrich the data through different components, like, for example, hearing, speaking, right? And every kind of visuals, right? So with those services, with those algorithms, we can improve or enrich the data that we're processing. Event Hub is designed to to collect and ingest millions of events per second. And the next component, the Azure Stream Analytics, is the one that allows us to do real-time analytics with that streaming data, right? And well, Power BI is the set of reporting tooling to present and render the data for the final user. So if we start, just going a little bit deeper, we can discuss about different scenarios, right? For example, a traditional data pipeline, we're going to go through an example later. We can do big data transformation. We can, for example, get unstructured data and enrich it with different cognitive services or AI functions to get a particular result, right? Going again to the streaming, right? We can ingest any kind of event through streaming to do the processing, right? And finally, the common point of all this is Power BI, which allow you to get the output in an enriched way. So for the user cases, we can consider also this situation, right? A traditional relational workload, right? For example, with an OLTP engine, SQL Server, then warehouse, and then the analysis at the end, going through an ETL process that can be done through Azure Data Fabric, right? Data Factory, sorry, and the reporting at the end. So this is like a traditional project, right? In where we handle and we manage relational data, right? Transactional systems. So any business critical application, it can be deployed with any of the components. The only thing we need to figure it out and design and implement is how this solution is going to be, right? Then for the big data, again, like a summary, data ingestion, processing and storage, and the same for any single cloud or any data source, cloud or on-prem actually, right? All right, so when we go to the component, the first one I'm gonna be talking about is the relational databases. Let's go. Oh, wait a second, it's not allowing me to move. Okay, here we are. Yeah. So let's talk about a little bit about the offering that Azure gives us in the relational area, right? Initially with SQL Server. So if we want to have a quick presence in Azure, if we want to kind of quickly lift and shift what we have, the project that we've been working in our data centers, not the best, but the faster way to have this present in Azure is using virtual machines running SQL Server, the same SQL Server version and edition that we use in our project, right? Microsoft gave us a set of combination of different OS, SQL Server versions, and SQL Server editions. So very quickly, we can decide which one to use, and using either a backup restore or many of the online migration services and product that Microsoft offers, we can quickly have the same deployment that we have on-prem, but in the cloud. Then let's go to the right part of the slide. We have SQL databases, right? Azure SQL database. This is the offering that Microsoft gives us as a platform as a service, right? So it's provide us with a SQL endpoint in where the only thing that we had to do here is just connect, right, and deploy our databases and focus on the database. We don't have to worry and pay attention of some of the things that in an infrastructure as a service, right, like a virtual machine, right, we have to do here. So we don't have to take care of the patching. We don't have to care much about the backups, right? There are some things that we have to take care of, but definitely we don't need to worry about setting up the infrastructure for deployment and availability group with always on or this kind of thing, right? So Azure SQL Database is the offering that Microsoft gives us as a single endpoint, as a singleton database, right? It's definitely a flavor of SQL, right? It's not exactly what we have in our SQL 2016, 17, or 19, right? Because it's a little bit different. One of the main difference is that everything has to be encapsulated within the same user database, right? So if, for example, we have an existing application that could be legacy, could be mission critical, whatever, that basically have multiple databases, and there are procedures, report, whatever, that involves joining between tables or objects that are distributed on different databases. Well, in Azure SQL database, it's not a straightforward way to do it, right? Actually, right, the way to migrate those kind of projects is basically with one of these tools, right? Database migration assistant, database migration service, etc., etc. It's not like we can take a backup and restore it into this service and we will have exactly the same that we have. If we need to handle these Azure databases, more than one, right? And we have to dynamically assign resources based on the usage. For example, we know that Thanksgiving is around, or Christmas, for example, and we can dynamically grant more resources because we know that most probably our business will have more consumption. So those services, right? Also, I mean, even during the day, maybe during the business hour, we process ton of data, and then during the night, the service is a little more light or relaxed. So dynamically with these pools, we can handle those resources. So then, initially the VMs running SQL, then this Azure SQL database, right, which is a flavor of SQL. So there was this space in the middle that basically, a year and a half ago, plus minus, we got this new offering called Azure SQL Database Managed Instance, right? Basically, managed instance is almost 100% compatible service with SQL Server on-prem, right? Which basically allow us to do some sort of lift and shift. So we can take a backup and restore it to a managed instance. And we have, as I said, almost identical functionality. We have service broker, we have replication, we have views, we have the SQL Server agent with the database mail. So it's an environment in where we're gonna definitely feel, used to, right? Because this is how we were coming from, the one that are coming from SQL Server. So definitely it's a nice offering. There are a couple of features that are not implemented yet, and hopefully they're going to be soon. But for most of them, definitely is a good choice, right? So we can have this present on a platform as a service. So again, we don't have to worry about taking the backups or setting up the availability groups or the HA, right? Or apply the patches, right? Because Microsoft do that for us, and we only need to worry about the database and the project that we are handling. So SQL Server runs in kind of every single place this day. We're gonna go through deeper a little bit more in a bit. So one of the offerings that Microsoft has, and also to cover one of the things that we discussed before, is having presence at the edge, right? To collect data and process those data. So there is an offering called Azure SQL Database Edge, which is currently in preview, which allow you to run SQL Server on a device like this, a Raspberry Pi, right? So with the very same footprint that we know from SQL Server, right? We can connect to with Management Studio, deploy our databases. Of course, it's not where we're gonna deploy our highly transactional environment to have our mission critical database, right? But definitely there are certain scenarios in where this Azure SQL Database Edge is going to be suitable, right? So it's still in preview. So if you want to take a look of this, you have to subscribe, and Microsoft will kind of whitelist your subscription so you can have access to it. So going into the Azure portal for that particular offering, right? Azure SQL, right? We're gonna just go to the portal, go to the resources, and say, well, let's choose Azure SQL. When we go to Azure SQL, we're gonna have something like this: the possibility of selecting an Azure VM, right? Azure SQL database, or a managed instance. It is quite interesting when we go to SQL Server virtual machines, we're going to see, a bunch of options in that combo box, right? We will see combination of different OSs, including different flavors of Linux and Windows, and also different versions of an edition of SQL Server, even the free ones, right, like developer edition. So definitely, this is the part of the portal that is going to be the starting point, right, or the entry, right, for whatever transactional project that we would like to do with SQL. So, like a quick summary, we have VMs running SQL Server, infrastructure as a service. We have Azure SQL database, the PaaS offering, the singleton database, and then we have managed instance. But there is more. Why do I say that? There are, several businesses that they would like to, embrace into the Azure data platform, but they are not using SQL Server, for example. So for those, Microsoft offers, for example, Azure Database for Postgres, right? This is a platform as a service that basically allows you to have your Postgres SQL deployment in a managed service, right? So again, like a managed instance, you can have your databases, and Microsoft is going to take care of the patching of the high availability, etc. So it's a managed service for Postgres, right? The same is for MariaDB, right? If you have your deployments, your databases using MariaDB, and you quickly want to embrace in Azure, right? There is also the managed service for MariaDB. So, like final summary for transactional SQL Server, we know that is the base of or part of the family of the SQL offering that are in Azure. SQL Server runs in multiple platforms, right? Linux, Windows, since ever, and containers, and also in ARM devices now. It's fully integrated with the Spark, with the offering in SQL Server 2019 of SQL Server Big Data Platform. Is the leading in performance, right, for a number of years. Also is the most secure engine for the last 8 years plus, and it's offered a rich tooling for developers and data analytics and reporting. So
Javier, real
again,
quick,
yes.
can you switch back to the presenter view? I mean, the presentation mode. It switched over to presenter view somehow on the display settings. Yeah, it flipped around.
No, so okay. So I think what the problem was. Give me 1 second.
Sure.
Something just happened with my sharing. 1 minute. Just had 3 screens. Change presenter. No. Not allowing me to. Okay.
Looks good.
Is it good now?
Yes.
Okay, good. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened. I know I saw that there was like a flickering in the screen a few minutes ago, but sorry about that. So as I mentioned, right, SQL Server runs kind of everywhere these days. For the ones that like to run it in a Linux environment that feel more comfortable, it runs on the major distributions like Red Hat, SUSE, and Ubuntu. And for the containers offering, we can run it in any Docker environment or Kubernetes if we want to go in a scale service. So getting out of SQL or transactional databases, OLTP environments, we go with here with Data Factory, right? So when we present Data Factory, this is like a normal, let's say, deployment, right? We have Data Factory at the top, right, at the center, actually, in where, very easily we can select any cloud data source, and we can, do ETL and ingest it into a SQL Server. And then if we want to integrate with our on-prem data sources, right, there is some sort of gateway that basically make the link between the Azure Analysis Service and our on-premise data source. So we can, read data from our SQL servers or any other database system that we have on-prem, even files or any data source. Additionally, we can control the execution of integration service packages, right? And, from the Data Factory project, right, we can control all that and combine it, right? So again, Data Factory, one of the services that we should definitely pay a lot of attention. So when we go to this Azure Databricks, as we mentioned briefly before, the offering of Databricks in an Azure environment. So we have, the possibility of having one environment in where we receive data from any source, right? And we can set up like a collaborative environment for any kind of power user, like, for example, data engineers, data scientists, or business analysis, right? At the top of that, there are a ton of machine learning libraries that can be used to enrich and process all the data with Databricks, right? The good part of that, one of the one that I like the most, is that this is the same picture, a little bit more distributed, just mimic the one that we saw before, right? But the part that I like the most is that we can treat the data that we ingest into Databricks as normal tables, right? We can use and combine it with streaming data. We can enrich the data with machine learning, and we have the possibility of using graph, right? And all of that, to be able to do that, we have a different set of APIs. So we can work with R, we can work with T-SQL, right? Python, Scala, Java, so any of these languages that we feel more comfortable or we need for that particular solution, right? So definitely we can, one of the things that I'm doing these days is basically importing ton of CSV and Parquet files into Azure Databricks, right? Processing as some sort of tables, right? And with machine learning, training some machine learning model to, then present that data to Power BI. So definitely is quite powerful and something to pay attention. One of the components we mentioned also is Azure Analysis Services, which basically is the same pairing than SQL Server and Azure database managed instance, but for analysis services, right? The one that we come from the SQL Server world. Then one of the most important component also is analysis services. So we have the installation media, we set up analysis services, and if we do it on-prem, we can decide if we go with a multidimensional model or a tabular model, right? The offering for analysis services in Azure, meaning Azure Analysis Services, again, this endpoint in where the only thing we have to do is just deploy our model with Visual Studio or any other tool, right? And then process the data. The only difference between, or one of the main difference between analysis services and Azure Analysis Services is that it only support tabular model, right? Since at this time Microsoft is not doing a lot of investment in multidimensional anymore, so all the investment is going to tabular, so it kind of makes sense, right? So Azure Analysis Services to deploy tabular models in the cloud, one of the services that I use the most, and definitely has a good integration with any kind of data source, even the on-premise data source, right? So let's say that you have your own, your transactional environment in your on-prem world, right? You have your relational database, you have your warehouse, and you have the the analysis services at the end, everything with an ETL process. And if you want to start moving pieces by pieces, right, you can move analysis services first, right? And in order to connect to those other servers that you still have on-prem, right, Microsoft has this offering called on-premise data gateway, right? This data gateway is a piece of software that basically makes that magic, right? That link your data sources that you have at your own company, at your own network, with the Azure services. This is an installer that you have to install it on a machine or a VM in your network, right? And it's going to be the gateway not only for Azure Analysis Services, right? If you use Azure Logic Apps or Power BI that need to access your local data sources, right? Or even Power Apps or Flow, you can use this gateway. So then we have Azure Cosmos DB. We mentioned briefly that Azure Cosmos DB is a database service, right, which support multiple models, right? It's globally distributed, and we can use it to store any kind of data. We can assign resources very easily from the Azure portal. We can deploy it immediately in any point of the globe, right? And since it's a multi-master model, so we can write from any of the entry points, and the latency is very, very slow. Azure Cosmos DB is basically part of the Azure infrastructure for the Azure portal, for example. All the data for the Azure portal is stored in Azure Cosmos DB. So we can have this globally distributed at the scale multimodal database, right? So again, we can use any kind, several APIs that are available to handle this data, like SQL, MongoDB, Gremlin, and Cassandra, right? So we can use the one that we feel more comfortable. So then for the developer experience, Microsoft is delivering, this Azure Data Studio has almost a year or around a year. in the market is the offering that you can have installed in your computer to handle not all the services, but some of them, right? So Azure Data Studio allowed you to connect, not deploy, but manage several of these products. For example, any of the SQL Server offering. Azure Data Studio is basically an offering that complements SQL Server Management Studio. Management Studio is a really mature product which allow us, the DBAs, to do any kind of troubleshooting because it's quite rich to do, for example, analysis on the execution plan. But Microsoft had to take the decision, okay, do we have Management Studio and we port it to different OS, or we come up with a different application? So Azure Data Studio, one of the most important points is that you can natively run it on Windows, Mac, or Linux. And you can connect to, as I said, to any to several services, right? The concept of notebooks in Azure Data Studio is also something that we definitely need to pay a lot of attention, because it's allow you to create one rich document in where you can combine different languages like T-SQL, PowerShell, R, Scala, Java, right? And distribute it through this document. So Azure Data Studio, the concept of notebooks is something that is definitely worth to try. Then we have the Azure portal, in where we can provision, monitor, and administer all the services or resources that we create in Azure. The good part of the portal is that doesn't matter which kind of service you are provisioning, right? The experience is quite familiar and similar, even if you are doing an Azure SQL database, analysis services, or a Cosmos DB, right? The way to handle it is quite familiar. So let's jump briefly to the portal. Right here, I have my portal, right, in where I have my resource group, which is this concept to group in different kind of services, and then you can eventually, if you can, if you have to destroy all those resources, you just destroy the resource group, and all of them go with that. But it's a way of doing the grouping. So here I have all the resources that, or some of the resources that we were discussing today, like an Azure Analysis Services, Azure Data Factory. We see also Azure SQL Database, Managed Instance, Virtual Machine running SQL Server, and there was also PostgreSQL. So if we want to create, for example, an analysis services, we just type here analysis services, right? And for example, we get the one that I already have, but here, if I hit add, right, I have the possibility of doing a new deployment, right? It's going to ask me for several things, like, for example, my subscription, the name, the resource group, the location in which Azure data source is going to be located, etc., etc. But if I go, for example, to Azure SQL, as we mentioned at the beginning, right, and we hit again add, we have at the portal, the offering for Azure SQL Database, the offering for Managed Instance, and as I mentioned, also several combination of OS and Windows Server. We can choose the one we want. So let's choose one randomly, and we hit create, right? So you will see that the experience to create the different services, doesn't matter if it is a VM or if it is any other service, is quite similar, right? So of course, there are certain things that are only valid for some of the services and not for all of them. But for example, the subscription, the name, the resource group, the location, those are settings that we have to specify for all the resources. So, okay, well, the idea again was to get to know all these most important or the most common services in Azure for our data platform project. So let me switch to here. Oh, come on. 1 minute. Today my computer is not behaving. Here we go. And switching. All right, so that was the Azure portal. As I was saying, the idea was just to do a brief introduction of most of these services so we can know them, and eventually if we need to use one of them, we can say, okay, now I need more information, more training, maybe in Azure Data Factory or Databricks or Cosmos DB, but at least we know how we present those services and the offering in Azure. So we have this portfolio of services to use in our next project. Hopefully you take advantage of this. So thank you so much. That is the presentation. I'm opening for questions. And again, right, I leave my contact information in case you want to reach me.
All right. Yeah, thank you, Javier. So the one question we do have is if you can share your slide deck.
Yes.
All right. Yeah, if you can email
I will send it to you.
Yeah, if you email it over to me, I can attach it to the webcast.
Okay, very good.
And then the question, one question we have, another question.
Hello, I think I lost your audio.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, now I do.
Okay. Yeah. Do you use Databricks also for your data warehouse scenarios?
Today, no. Today, I'm still coming from the original Azure Data Warehouse, right? Trying to do the transitioning to Azure Synapse Analytics, and I've seen the possibilities in Azure Databricks. It's definitely quite powerful. So there's going to be one point in where when the service get into GA, general availability, that's going to be the point in where we have to evaluate again and compare both of the offering. And one of the important things also in this whole equation is the pricing, right? So for some projects, most probably we'll keep using Synapse Analytics, but for the others, Azure Databricks. As I said, I'm still in the situation in where I have to get out of Azure Data Warehouse. But definitely it's a valid option.
All right, excellent. So that's all the questions that we actually have here so far. So Javier, thank you again for presenting today. Thank you everyone for attending. This has been a great session, and hope everyone has a great rest of the day.
All right, thank you so much, everyone. Have a good night. Bye.